This is fine. This is fine. This is fine. This is fine. This is a poor substitute for therapy, but an excellent substitute for other podcasts.
We're not like other podcasts.
Join us as we find the answers to the universe's biggest questions like, is butter a carb? Does crying burn calories? And what the fuck am I doing with my life? We're here to be your part-time therapist, astrologer, concierge doctor, and fairy godmother. Do you need someone to validate you today? Cool. Come on in. We're fine. This is fine. Welcome back to today's episode of This is Fine. I hope you're super fine today, enjoying the beginning of autumn. Thank you so much for the messages that so many of you sent to me about the last episode and our chat about career ennui and identity and motivation. I am so grateful that it resonated with so many of you and that it was validating. Validate me harder, Daddy. Hearing from you is my favorite part of creating content and podcasts. I love you all so much. Thank you for those messages. Okay, so just getting right into it today, our episode is about moving to France. In these fraught political times in the US, a lot of Americans are like, do I even want to be here anymore? Or maybe you are still a ride or die patriot and you just want to take a break, a la Ross and Rachel. Perhaps your dream of moving abroad has nothing to do with fleeing the US, but you need advice regardless. So let's break down that process of leaving America and moving to France. Today, I have brought in Paris's top immigration attorney for Americans, my personal lawyer, who I am lucky to call a friend and fellow San Diegan, Daniel Tostado, avocat à la cour. It means basically attorney at law in French, if you're curious. Daniel has created a life for himself here in France, and by the time you are hearing this episode, he and his wife Lisa will have just welcomed their baby into the world and into their beautiful riverside garden home outside the city center. They are truly living the new French dream, the new American dream. When I say that Daniel has a heart of gold, that is simply because there are not enough words to describe his generosity and selfless spirit. When he is not helping immigrants like me in the office, he is welcoming refugees into his home and giving them a place to stay. He is truly such an angel on this earth, a phenomenal human being, and has so much to share with you today. So today we will go over the process of getting here, some visa options, logistics. We will answer some of your questions from Instagram. And we'll get Daniel's take on French culture, integration, transitioning into life here, and what makes moving to France so special. Let's do it. Daniel, I am so psyched you are here today. Thank you so much for coming on This Is Fine.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Are you fine today?
I'm fine. Yeah, I'm T-minus 10 days until my wife gives birth, so a little bit distracted.
Yeah. Thank you for making time despite that distraction.
I think it's the time to do this kind of thing. Once the kid comes, you game over.
It's game over. No more Daniel on the podcast.
There's no more social life. So
enjoy your podcast while you can. This is the last time you're going to hear Daniel.
Yeah, this is peak Daniel.
This is peak Daniel moment.
And
in
now
his,
we're just downhill from here.
Final hours of not being a dad. You've always had the dad vibe, though.
I give off dad energy, just in general, like adult energy towards my clients here in France.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, giving off dad energy since 2000 something.
Yeah, well, it helps. It might help people win in 2024. So you never know.
You never know. Okay, well, thank you. I'm so glad you are fine. So excited for your growing family. So just a quick Q&A, like before we get into like the meat of this episode, I would love to know what inspired you to get into immigration law.
Yeah. So in terms of getting into it, I had always had a certain romantic idea of France and what it means to live in France. And I'd always seen myself somehow making that happen here in France, and had a heck of a time trying to figure out how that actually worked concretely. Because, you know, I was in college, I decided to move to France, work on a vineyard, and I got here, I started speaking with like a vineyard guy, and he's like, yeah, but do you have like a visa? Do you have a titre de séjour? Do you have work authorization? And I was like, maybe I can figure that out locally. Maybe I can go down to like the Bordeaux prefecture.
I'll just go to the office, the visa office, and get one.
The kind people at the office.
I will have one visa, please.
Oh, it's in euros. Okay, I'll pay in euros.
For sure.
And just the extent to which it wasn't doable. And for an Americans, it's almost like, you know, if you're born in the right place, or you have the right passport, or you married the right person, or you have the right, you know, job transfer kind of thing. Something like that was like what the options were on the menu. But I looked more into it, and I saw that there was other routes, that if you study in France, if you get a master's, you can stay and you can try to then have 12 months to join the workforce. And I said, okay, well then I'm ready to be a lawyer. So let's look at law schools in America that have this dual program with a French, you know, law school, such that I can finish, get a French master's, stick around, take the US, you know, New York bar, sit then for the French bar, and then stick my landing here. Nice. And so that's exactly what happened. I kind of was an outsider, became an insider. And then that's been my call is because I care about France so much, is to then kind of reach back my arm and help folks that are outsiders, help them become insiders.
Have the same dream.
Yeah.
And that's what you did for me. Thank you.
Yeah.
that's how we're here right
and my
now.
entire circle of friends. I'm like the doctor at the party, and I'm like, I've got a mole. I'm like, let's take a peek. Have you emailed the prefecture about this mole?
Did you check the prefecture website about this mole? No, it's perfect. And thank you for all that you do for all of us, truly.
Yeah.
So glad you were inspired by France and by the shitty immigration process that you can help guide people through. Yeah. You found the problem. You had some answers. I love it. I love it. So let's just start with it. It's hard to get to France for a lot of people. I know that these are 2 of your FAQs. I'll go over both of them and we can start with number 1. But what are the different visa options for Americans who are looking to move to France? And then which one of those would be the most common, popular, or like quote unquote easiest for Americans to apply for when moving to France? I guess we could start with like the options overall. Yeah.
I generally tell people there's about 4 different ways of making this move here to France. It's either via a relationship, via this what's called the long stay visitor visa, which ends up being very useful for Americans, student status, or work. And then work kind of splits into 2 halves, work as an entrepreneur and work as an employee. And on that employee net, a lot of Americans have this romanticized notion of, okay, well, I'll just get hired by a French company.
Right.
Here's
like
here's my random email with the CV attached, and the French don't care about you. Like, they don't want to hire you. You didn't get a French master's degree. You did not do an internship after that master's degree in France. So to them, and maybe your French isn't as good as you would hope it would be.
Right.
Like, none of these qualities make you appealing to them.
You're not a competitive candidate here.
For one note, but the other note is that it's also a marriage when you get hired in France. Like, you get, like, the standard contract in France is CDI, contrat à durée indéterminée, which means that they can't fire you after the trial period.
It's like impossible to get fired.
Right, which makes it really hard to get hired. Versus in America,
because it is such a bond. Yeah.
Yeah. In America, you can get hired, you can get fired. You're never really quite sure in your job. Kind of like how you could buy a house and then flip the house. And in France, there's no buying and flipping because you pay notary fees. There's a lot of, there's always a lot of extras.
It's complicated on purpose.
Yeah.
Big commitment here.
Yeah. And so we get, so it's really hard to be an attractive candidate for them. So it's not truly going to be your route into France via a job offer that, happens to basically nobody.
It's so rare, yeah.
Versus a lot of other routes are a lot more feasible. So like entrepreneurship, it's a really good example of if you've got your own idea, if you've got, a real serious pitch, it can make you more than French minimum wage, which is 20,000 euros. If
20,000 a year, correct?
22,000, exactly, okay. Yeah. And if you can line up some amount of clients in France, whether they're hypothetical today or, actual concrete leads,
you've got a plan.
Then all of a sudden, they've got something they can sink their teeth into, say, okay, I can see how you're not taking a French job, but you're creating one for yourself. And so that's actually a super feasible way in. There is the long stay visitor visa, which I'd say about half my clients end up pursuing. I don't want to put too much emphasis on that in this podcast because there is some complications around the right to telework on this status.
Right, the clause.
I'll give you a 1-sentence summary, and for everything else, that people can just call me directly. But the 1-sentence version of this is to say that the French consulate and the prefecture have confirmed in writing they are okay with international teleworking on the visitor status. And that's why post-COVID has been such a draw for Americans to come here saying, look, I want to have France in my life. I don't need a French job. I don't have anybody located in France as my client. And therefore, here is now a way for me to make this move.
Yep. I can have my life here, even though my work is still anchored in the US.
And that long stay visitor visa is valid for 1 year. It's renewable for 5 years. After 5 years, you can get the 10-year card. The 10-year card includes work authorization. It lets you have 10 years with the prefecture off your back.
Yeah, so you graduate, right?
Yeah. And so it's really favorable. And to kind of wrap things up for this first question, the most surefire way of making that move to France is that student route. And that's the route that I picked. So you get enrolled in some kind of master's degree here in France. You do the master's. Afterwards, they let you stay here in France and find a job or make your own company. And then 12 months later, at the end of that 12-month buffer period, there you are. You've entered the French workforce. They like you. France has kept you.
You got your in.
And now you're off, and you're off to the races. And you could eventually get for naturalization. You can have, big high hopes, big dreams. You've made France yours.
Yes. Love it. Okay. So let's say someone is thinking about this, but they're like, I don't really think I could go back to school. Maybe they're too old for it, or they think they're too old. You're never too old to be a student. FYI. But let's say this is someone's mindset.
Yeah.
Would you recommend long stay visitor at that point?
Maybe, yeah. Okay. So it would depend on how established they are in their career, how open they are to going back and pursuing studies. because it's not for everyone. And I think we've learned that in America in the past like 10 or 20 years to say like, not everyone needs to go to college. Not
Totally.
every, like there's there's many options in this world.
Absolutely. And also it might be difficult to go to school and not have an income, especially if you're not able to work in France because you're on a student visa.
You're allowed to work part-time on the student visa.
Okay.
But like, imagine living in Paris where the rent might cost, 1,200 euros a month, and you're trying to work part-time, and, French minimum wage might be 11 euros an hour, and trying to recuperate all these hours.
The math isn't mathing.
Yeah, you can try your math. And then, it's why I'd say it's like kind of the work of a lawyer to kind of sit down with your situation, figure it out. But like, let's say you've got a long-term boyfriend and he's Italian and you've been together for 3 years and you're really serious, and you've been talking about marriage. If there's a possibility to get married or to get paxed, pax is a civil union here in France, then there are other doors that might be explored. You certainly don't want to shoehorn a relationship into some like immigration status and like force a marriage or force a pax. But
it's an option.
But I have caused 5 marriages in the course of my conversation with these people to figure out, and no divorces, thank God.
Love that. What a track record. You did tell me to get a boyfriend in our first meeting.
In so many words. No, I wouldn't put that.
Legally, he didn't say that.
No, but were there to be one in your life, that would be advantageous.
Yeah, in many ways.
So yeah, there's plenty of ways to make this work. Frankly, I say that if a person truly wants to have France in their life, there is a solution. It's just a matter of figuring out like which one of these shoes is the best fit.
Love it. Everything is figure outable. You're going to have your French Cinderella story. I love that.
French Cinderella story. Yeah, there you go.
You brought up the shoe. I just was riffing off of you.
Yeah, I call it Your Best French Life. I feel like that could be the name of my own hypothetical podcast.
Oh my gosh, is this the birth of your new podcast?
On your channel?
On my channel, it's a soft launch. We have a hard lunch.
There's like a Greek mythology thing where like someone's born out of the neck of somebody else.
Are you springing out of my neck?
My current podcast is necking out of your actual
promotional material for today's episode. Just a little.
I can picture like the image of,
like a boil, but it's your head.
I'm the black bubonic plague just emerging from your armpit.
Jesus, I love it. This is very on brand for this show, so thank you.
I'm here for it.
Okay, so we've got these options. We've got some potential avenues that people can pursue. So you know this. The day after I talked to Amanda and Morgan for this very show on this podcast, next day I booked a visa appointment and I applied for the wrong visa. And I feel like this is a good time to explain like what the process is like for like signing up, choosing the right one, and like when to bring a lawyer into the scope. Yeah.
For the audience sake, can you remind me what you initially were trying to file for?
So I initially filed for, I think, like micro-entreprise or like auto-entrepreneur, something like, indépendant.
Yeah.
Which I was like, oh yeah, I'm an independent worker in the US. I didn't think about it being like, oh, you have an independent business in France. Right? So I applied to that. That is one, right?
Yeah. So that's that category that's called entrepreneur professionnel libéral.
Libéral. Thank you. That's what it was. Okay. Exactly.
And so that's the one where you're saying to the government, look, I've got a pitch. I'm going to line up some French clients. I usually tell my clients to have like 2 to 5 recommendation letters from people here in France.
Yep.
And it's really tricky if you're staying in a home in Los Angeles or something, you don't have any of these leads. It might not be the right category to start with right at the gate from the consulate.
Right.
It might be better to enter France on some other status, student, visitor, kind of get the lay of the land, start to make really good networking in a year or two's time, then pivot. It's called the changement de statut, a change of status, and then explore opening the door towards that.
Because if someone starts with one type of visa, they have the option, and we talked about this on Morgan's episode, so if you listen to that, you already know this, but you can change your visa type. You're not tied. This part's not the marriage. You're not married to one type of visa forever.
No. Although the prefecture agent certainly can make our lives hard. One of our clients this week, he was trying to go justement from visitor to entrepreneur, and they're like, they sent back a message saying, a visitor can't change status.
Oh my God.
And then they're like, you promised you wouldn't be working in France. And here you are asking to work in France. And it's like the second time I've heard that, maybe 5 years, where someone had it thrown back in their face that they're on this category. So on some level, you asked about the question of like, when do we pull in the lawyer? Sometimes it's hard to know when the lawyer needs to be in this like ahead of schedule so that we can already kind of be ready with the baseball bat
on the defense
to, hit the balls right back at them.
Yep.
Or sometimes when it's like, oh, I filed this on my own and then it got really messy. So can you clean up this? Here's a mop. Can you clean up this mess? And it's like, it might be a little bit too hard to mop that back up and say, okay, actually, here's how we, put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Sure. So it's hard to say ahead of schedule. But what I will say is that our role in terms of us as immigrants and us as, and then separate us as immigration lawyers, is to be like the David against the Goliath, us, the immigrant, against the immigration system here in France, the administration, because we're like a little piece on their board game. We're saying, I want to play on your board game, on your Monopoly board game, French edition. and they're giving us permission to, but on their rules.
Can I be the baguette?
The little,
the little
metallic. I'll be the little beret that's moving around.
Love it. So, okay, it varies per person, right? On when you involve a lawyer.
Yeah.
Would you say like anytime someone's hitting a wall, like it might be time to ask for some legal counsel?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And on some level, it has to do with autonomy, because some folks are self-driven and really get this, and they might need minimal guidance. They kind of can figure this out on their own. Maybe they moved to Italy like 3 years ago and they kind of already got the hang of what this kind of feels like. But
the European system.
Yeah. The trick of it is, though, that if you're going for a visa, it's all in foreign language already, with a foreign legalese. Like, it's not your legalese that you're used to.
Right, which is already as hard in your native language, especially if you didn't go to law school.
Yeah. And then, on top of then all of that, what they're asking for, what they're obsessed with is totally different. French are obsessed with birth certificates.
Yeah, what the hell? You warned me about this.
The idea is that, French, since the 19th century, have a really good system of civil status, état civil. So they've kind of classed everyone and their mother and their father by who you're born to, and what date. And then when you get married, it gets mentioned on your birth certificate. When you get divorced, it gets mentioned on your birth certificate. When you get
updated, it's a living document.
It's a living, breathing document, like the Constitution. And the cool thing is, when you get naturalized, like our friend Amanda's going for naturalization right now, once she gets naturalized, they generate a French birth certificate for her, like she's being reborn a Frenchie.
In France. I love that.
Yeah.
Now I want one.
yeah, let's get you one.
Yeah.
And so they think of us as foreigners. They're like, okay, well, show me your birth certificate. Let's start at the start.
Right.
Show me who you are. And a lot of America's birth certificates, don't necessarily reflect what the French are looking for. You remember back in 2011, Barack Obama, long form, short form birth certificates. The French want to see this long form birth certificate that has all their details. American birth certificates are different. They mention like race on it, and the French are like, what do you mean your race is appearing on your birth certificate? So it's a totally different conception of like, what are the schools of thought? And then let's say a woman in the 1970s got married and then got divorced, and she kept her divorce name. The French is like unthinkable.
They freak out about
They're
that.
like, you need to write to your dead husband and ask him for permission to use his name is on your passport. How did this happen? And
it's my legal name.
In America, we were just kind of loosey-goosey. Like, you just changed your name in the 70s and that was your new name, and you told the passport office, and now that you're this.
Yeah.
And
done.
And in France, they need to have like a judicial decree. And in France, to change your last name, you need to ask the national authorities to change it because your last name is like Monsieur Fromage or Framboise or like Bon Cul. And then it's like you're telling them, I need to change this because it's really embarrassing. And they'll make a national decree to tell all of France that you are no longer Madame Fromage.
Oh my God.
So different schools of thought.
That's wild.
Why we as Americans are trying to plug into their system.
Yeah.
And it's like, does not compute.
Right. It's like we don't have the power adapter for this outlet.
Justement. Like we don't quite get why, because the currency flow here in France is 225, in America it's 112. Yeah. It's a lot of us figuring out. And it's usually that first year is the heaviest of lifting of like,
stickiest,
how do I, like, what is this healthcare thing? How do I file taxes in France? And what is the right visa for me?
Yep.
Usually if you can push through that first year, you're on the other side of the curve and you're chill. You're in.
I feel like I'm chilling now. I had my first prefecture appointment.
Okay.
I think I may have told you 3.5 hours waiting outside in the rain and the hail to pick up my titre de séjour, but now I have a titre de séjour.
Now, speaking of pivoting off of your podcast, I have a titre de séjour song.
Oh my God. Can we get a clip for this episode?
This might be a short that you can have, being played out. But it goes, J'ai mon titre de séjour, je peux pas être plus enthousiaste, je peux pas être plus enthousiaste.
I'm fist pumping.
Yeah, we both are for the listener. And that is the song you're required now to sing when you go collect your card and you walk out of there gloriously with your titre de séjour in your hand.
Damn, I wish I had a voice note a couple days ago.
We'll cut this, we'll hype this, and we'll spread the love on that one.
Beautiful, yes. Fans and critics alike are proclaiming a victory of this song.
Yeah.
I love it. But it very much is the vibe when you leave. Because once you have it, you're like, oh my God, I'm so happy.
Yeah.
Like once I got to a living, breathing person after waiting in that queue, she was so nice.
Actually, really? Because I'm not necessarily happy to see you. Because
she was really nice to me.
It's not the world's like most joyful job. Because,
like
8 hours a day. Yeah, just like 8 hours a day. She's like, and here's your card. And here's your card. And, there's not much reflection going on.
No, she was so cute. She was like looking at my passport. She's like, you changed your hair. And I'm like, It was like, we're having a little moment.
That's good.
Yeah.
I feel like in America, like when you deal with authorities, they are allowing themselves to have those moments. And in France, it's going back kind of at cultural cues for a second. I got two stories for you, but one is that I was hanging out in France for a very long time. I think it was post-COVID, and I flew back finally to America, landed in JFK, and the security guard at the airport, she was like, "I like your hat," and she goes, "I like your shirt. I like your whole thing." And like we as Americans were like, "Yeah, she's probably trying to count the hours. Like this is a fast way of passing time."
Yeah.
And it's okay for an American to engage with strangers, but like me having spent just like a solid year in lockdown here in France, and then come back to America, and be like, I forgot this part about Americans.
That's so weird. Yeah,
that
totally.
They're willing to engage with you in that manner. But that I had a different run-in with a French fast food person along these lines, where I finally saw a Beyond Meat thing on their venue.
No way.
And I love, I'm vegetarian. I love this Beyond Meat because I miss meat.
Totally.
This is the truthful answer.
Beyond Meat's good.
Yeah. And so I tried to engage the lady behind the desk. I was like, "Oh yeah, so you guys have Beyond Meat here?" And I was kind of like wanting to engage because she goes, "Oui, oui."
Yeah.
And so I was like, "Okay, let's." And I was like, and it's pretty popular then, I'm guessing, with the various customers. She goes, "Oui, oui." And I realized that
she's not picking up on this.
I was trying to escalate the conversation, and then she is in her French mentality trying to de-escalate.
Shut it down. Yeah.
Because France, they were occupied by Nazis in World War II. Maybe their mothers and grandmothers were saying, "Don't talk to strangers. Don't talk to people on the bus. You don't know who is, a collaborator with the Nazis, whatever. Don't trust strangers." In America, the last time we were invaded was like 1812.
Yeah.
We're like, "Oh, hi, buddy." Yeah. Like we're just like engaging with people. Like, what are you reading on the airline?
Totally. It's such a way of life.
Yeah.
Just a general connection with your brethren.
And so my wife always teases me. She's German, by the way, for the purpose of these stories, because she's like, "Danny, you always try to do this American thing where you're engaging with them."
I do it too. It's so normal.
Yeah. But I tell you what, I think the French secretly like us being smiley people.
Yeah. I think they like a little smile. Especially, I would say, like Paris versus like Provence. Like, there's a difference between people outside of this. Like, we're like in the New York of France, right?
Yeah.
Where
Paris,
it can
New
be
York
a
City
little colder.
Yeah.
But I feel like the people that I meet from other parts of France are happier in general to see a little bit of smiliness.
It's hard, it's hard to generalize. I'm not quite sure how it shakes out. But I am aware that, the Paris is the New York City of France. It's not quite France.
Totally. I've talked to like a friend of mine from Toulouse, and she was like, "Gosh, like it's so much less formal. Like I know you guys in America, you would never do like the vous." And she was saying, it's just warmer and smilier where I'm from, like in the South, and Paris just feels kind of like everyone's in a bad mood all the time. And I'm like, oh no, I personally. So in general, I personally have had really good, really engaging experiences. I think most of the time because I'm with my dog.
Oh, yeah.
And so French strangers, Parisian strangers come up to me. They want to ask, like, quelle race? Elle a quel âge? C'est une femelle? Like, they're always asking, like, about my dog. And so I talk to strangers quite a bit, and, like, very curious strangers. So I haven't quite had the same, like, I guess, Frenchified experience of, like, please don't ask me, except for when I was traveling here before I moved here. I remember being in Saint-Tropez, and I walked in, and I was like, "Oh, bonjour, ça va?" And she was like, "Ça va." Like,
who did you say ça va to? A shop owner?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I was like, "Comment allez-vous?" or something like that. And she was like, "Ça va." And she was like, "Why are you asking me?"
Yeah.
and then I kind of made fun of myself, and I was like, "Oh, c'est trop américain." And she was like, "Yeah."
It's very engaging.
she kind of laughed at that too, because I was like, "Oh, I get it."
I filmed a couple of videos on YouTube. I guess you can maybe have to plug in like a link to whatever your next one. But the videos, I made 3 videos. One was about how to befriend the French. One was about how to buy a property in France. And one is what does it mean to become French? And we talked in the videos about like cultural cues that, yes, you are supposed to walk into the shop and say bonjour, and that's a cultural cue.
Yes.
But they're not looking for more than that bonjour.
Anything other than like the politesse or like the jump. And for us, it's like you say, "Hi, how are you?" Like, what is your state of being before I engage in a conversation with you? That's not a thing here. And
the challenge of it is like we might not mean it when we say, "How are you?" Like we're not actually inquiring how they are. And like on some level, if you're saying ça va, yes, in French you could close it right down, ça va. The ça va leads to a ça va.
Yeah.
But that's much, much more than she bargained for and letting you walk into her shop.
Yeah, everyone's just like, "I'm good."
Yeah.
And I'm waiting for I have an automatic thing in my head where it's, "And how are you?" And I'm ready to say like, "I'm good as well." Like it's all queued up in my head, but then it like the record scratches.
Yeah. My favorite one is when I first moved to France. The very first time I moved here was 2010. And I bought, it was like an outdoor marché, and I bought, let's say some random like collection of apples. And then he handed me the bag and I said, "Merci." And he said back to me, "C'est moi." And I looked at him. I was like, c'est vous? Like, c'est vous quoi? Like,
what?
Like he said, it's me.
What?
And he goes, yeah, c'est moi qui vous remercie. Like, it's me to be thanking you.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, it's
Thanks,
like
buddy.
it's a short, for those of you who don't speak French, it's a short way of saying like, my pleasure.
Yeah,
like, you're welcome.
Yeah. But you were talking about your dog Stella a second ago. There's a couple things that will crack the eggshell of the French. So it's dogs, it's Bebe in the little poussette in the strollers. My wife and I do a stand-up paddle on a river right outside of Paris.
Love.
And that's another, weirdly enough, way to crack their shell, because they start being curious about you, like standing up on a river, rowing down the river, like what do you call that?
Some kind of fun, like physical activity outside.
Yeah, the kids are like pointing at, like waving to me, waving back to them. There's some amount of engagement. So there are ways to break through to the French, but truly it's dogs and kids is like the easiest way.
It's helped so much because I haven't had that like very cold experience that I know some people can have with the cultural difference, where it's like, I don't know how to get through. I know Morgan makes fun of me. She's like, you're Emily in Paris Yellow Brick Roading it. Like, yeah, sometimes a little bit.
Yeah, I don't have a good solution to that. In that video, in that video that I made about how to befriend the French, I like interviewed like 20 people, including Amanda. And one of those tips was that the French, oh, here we go. We're in Europe. You hear the bells chiming now. That when it comes to befriending the French, there's a first wave when they are like in high school, college, and they have all those friends.
Oh, they're school friends. Yeah.
And then there's a second wave when you have kids and they have kids and they're befriending like the moms and the dads of their kids. That's another wave.
Okay.
And the awkwardest moment is when you're in your 20s, because you're showing up in Paris and they are from Paris and they've got their whole network is around them. And so you might be like, they might be one of your top 5 friends, but you might be in their top 30. Because they've got someone like they've got Jean-Michel that they've been put with since they were 14.
Yeah.
And you are lower down on that chain.
Totem pole,
on that totem pole of friendship. And so there could also be like a disconnect. Like I want to be friends with you and we've got a good connection,
but there's an inequality in priority.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it is just hard to break through. Secretly though, surreptitiously, there's all these American expats with the same vibe, the same Americanisms, the same references to Anchorman film, and all this cultural baggage.
The Anchorman reference is too good. On that note, I want to kind of circle it back to visas a little bit.
Sure.
Maybe some biggest mistakes, like the most common mistakes that people make when they're applying to visas. What's something that you see like tout le temps?
There's a lot of easy mistakes that we see that I think are avoidable. So it depends on what category you're filing for. It's a certain amount of giving yourself enough time for it to be processed. So like a lot of folks that might be listening to you are maybe students, they're about to study abroad, they might need a student visa. And there's like a 2-step process. The first step is called Campus France, and you have to go through Campus France online, get approved, and then go for the student visa filing in person. And so like they don't necessarily realize that it might take a week or 2 for it to be approved, and that you have to do the Campus France thing online. There's a Donald Rumsfeld quote, "You don't know what you don't know." And I feel like a lot of what happens when you move into France is that adjustment, but it's also like realizing that it is a foreign system. We as Americans have always had the right in our home country to work in any manner, to move from California to Arizona, it's just a 6-hour drive and then you're there.
You've never been put in a circumstance where you can't do something like that.
Right, where you're being really truly limited, where like your permission to exist is, up to them.
Right.
Like, will I be allowed to exist here in France? And it's really challenging when you're a year or 2 into this process, where you've been here for a year or 2 and you're up for renewal or up for a change of status and you feel vulnerable because you're like, I think my adult project is France.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like France is loving me back right now. And we're going through, like, I'm dealing with, like, let's say the Paris prefecture, and I filed and I was on time and then my thing expired. And so I got the proof of filing, but I don't have any document in my hand today that say that I'm legal. And, we've got a funeral in America. Can I fly back for it?
Right.
What rights do I have? These are all questions where I feel like it's my role to be like, taking people by the hand.
Yeah, the dad.
in part to say like, this is what they're looking for. And the other half of my work is just to be a reassuring presence to say like, look, it will be okay. This will probably work out. They probably won't control you at the border. You'll be able to fly, you do have the proof of, application. So it's going to be a case by case, like what's the missing document in their given thing. But part of it is also just like the mentality that like, there's going to be maybe in this first 5 years, a bit of vulnerability. And then after 5 years, maybe you're on that longer term track.
Totally.
So, our mutual friend, Amanda, in the past few months, we filed her naturalization, and that's ongoing. And then she had on Monday, her filing for a 10-year card. You can get a 10-year card. You're pretty golden. You don't have to deal with the prefecture for 10 years.
That's amazing.
And it gives you full on work authorization unless you work in any manner whatsoever. And so then, and once you're naturalization, naturalized in Paris, it takes 18 months. Other prefectures takes longer.
Yeah.
Like
after you apply, it takes 18 months.
Yeah.
Okay.
So like once you've been here for 5 years, you can start to qualify. But even then, it takes 18 months at the very fastest for them to process it.
Sorry, not to interrupt you, but just on that very specific point, we had one of our listeners send in a question.
Sure.
Why? Why does it take that long?
Why does it take so long? It takes so long. And honestly, I think it could, if everyone got their ducks in a row, it could take them an afternoon, franchement. Yeah. But you're putting together a case file that has like 60 pages worth of stuff. It has your proof of housing, because they care about which prefecture you belong to. It has your birth certificate. We were just talking about that, which has to be apostilled, which if you want to know about.
Translated and stamped.
Yeah, stamped and all that. You have to provide your parents' birth certificates. You have to provide your marriage certificate. If you ever got divorced, you have to include that in original. You have to show your criminal background check from any country in which you've lived for more than 6 months. You have to get the 3 years of tax returns, all of your finances, professional insertion. So there's a lot of documents that actually go into it that have to be studied, language
Verified,
level. So they have to first go through it, and then they have to convoke you for an interview. There's a little bit of backlog because they don't have enough staff.
And the interview is sort of like also a test, right?
On some level it is a test.
Like
they want to make sure,
and history.
are you good enough? Do you know who the prime minister is? Do you know members of his cabinet right now? What is the national motto of France? Liberté, égalité, fraternité.
I was like, wait, I know this one.
And if you had to add a fourth value onto that, what's the right answer? And it's laïcité, which is the separation of church and state.
Whoa. That's the correct answer?
It is, yeah.
Wow.
And then after they finally approve it, then they have to send it to the national authorities. They approve it. They send it to the town of Nantes. They make you your own French birth certificate.
Why Nantes?
Yeah, Nantes where they manage civil status. So that's where they generate your birth certificate.
Cool.
They send it back to the Paris national authorities. They then put your name in a national decree. So it's just a lot of administration on their side to get you French citizenship. But American nationality takes years too.
Yeah, totally.
Like in defense of the French. And other European countries that are a little bit less organized than France take years and years and years. Right. So like shout out to France. You're aiming for Italian nationality, right?
Eventually, yeah.
Yeah, that's going to take longer than French nationality.
I'm certain it's going to take years. Yeah.
It's going to take years.
Yeah.
Was it you that told me that, or somebody else was telling me there's like a 20-year waiting list if you're trying to get this out of New York? No, yeah, it's hard. There's other countries that don't inherently function in the way that France does inherently function. France does work. France might be long, France might be bureaucratic, but it does work. And that's why I'm generally relieved as a lawyer here in France and not in other countries that it is a system that does work.
Like no country is a utopia, but France is doing pretty well.
Yeah, and that might be another longer episode in and of itself.
Exactly.
Like if we're aiming for utopia, does it look more like America? Does it look more like France?
Yeah,
but I think for you and for me and for our circle of friends, all things equal, we feel better here.
Mm-hmm. It's true. It's making me emotional. Yeah. I'm not going to cry on my own podcast. But yeah, it's pretty incredible. Like all things considered, I'm thinking like if my toughest day was waiting in line at the prefecture and all I had to do was wait in line, like it's not so bad.
You could say, this is fine.
This is fine.
This is
actually.
fine.
Thank you for that.
No
this
plug.
is fine. Okay, so we've kind of talked about like the general process of applying for a visa. The duration, sometimes it takes longer. I mean, we were just talking about naturalization. The duration for getting a visa, that's typically a few weeks.
Yeah,
right?
it can go really quickly, typically 3 weeks. 8 days for the visitor visa.
I got mine in like 3 days.
Boom.
Yeah, crazy. Like they turned that around, snap, like overnighted it to Washington, stamp, overnighted it back. Crazy. So it can go really quickly. They told me to wait or give myself up to 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So.
And that's just a difference. There's where you file in person is called the VFS.
Yes.
Who the actual experts are that are processing this is the consular agents that are trained by the French government. Consular agents are French. The VFS folks, they're not French.
Not at all.
They don't speak French.
Nope.
And their role is to be a paper pusher. So you give them the case file, they scan it and send it off.
Right.
And so then they're saying a certain thing. They might give themselves some coverage. Like it'll take them about 4 weeks. Mm-hmm. And then if it happens in 3 days, as you said, then you're happily surprised.
Right, exactly.
But it buys them the consulate time to process things as need be.
I will say the meanest person I met during my whole visa process was an American woman working at VFS. Like she could have easily told me like, this is not the right visa. You don't have the right documents. And like saved me that time. But no, she was like, yeah, I'll take your €100.
Well, I think I can give you some, if you're looking for some mean agents, I can give you some mean prefecture agents.
There's some here that you've identified.
They're my blacklist.
The blacklist,
there's actually a sign in prefectures that says you are not allowed in dependent legal law to shout at the prefecture agents.
Oh, yeah.
But there's no law that prevents them from shouting at you.
I watched that happen. I watched someone be like, get out of here.
Yeah. And so I've seen that too. Yeah. I mean, like, of course, like, we're not here to generalize because there's nice prefecture agents.
Exactly.
Our friend
Just
Amanda
like in the
had
US, there
a
are nice
lovely
people, mean
prefecture
people.
agents on Monday. But to go back a second ago to what we were discussing in terms of like France, walking into store shops, making friends with the French, there is that cold exterior that the French can have that we as outsiders have to deal with.
Right. And to them, I feel like that's polite. Like to not over-engage is actually more polite than to over-engage.
It could be, but I think like the brutaler side of that can show up in the prefecture where it can have a bit of an insider-outsider dynamic.
Yeah.
And I think that part of my role, especially back when the filings were done in person, is to be another insider to them, where I speak with French in a good level, and that they see me as an insider, and then my client as outsider, as another insider by extension. And my client can smile and look pretty and whatever, and the prefecture agent just assumes that everything's hunky dory.
Yeah, totally. Speaking of that, I know there's a lot of content right now on social media, YouTube videos, blogs that essentially say like you can get by in France without learning French, and I feel like that is doing people a disservice. Like quite a bit, and you're nodding, so I know you agree with me.
I'll chime in a second, but go on. Finish your thought.
I feel like it's important to talk about the importance of learning French when you're coming here, even if you're just, planning on staying a year or two.
Yeah, no, I'm the biggest apostle of having foreigners learning French because if it's the banker, the dentist, if there's a leak, they're going to talk to you in French, and they're going to use French terminology for one. So in your own personal life, it'll behoove you to be good at French. If you're eventually looking for jobs, maybe not day one if you are just getting here or whatnot, but maybe if you did the student route, maybe if your spouse is French or European, your life has just brought you here in France. The better your French is, the more employable you are on the French labor market.
And the easier your life is.
Yeah.
That's part of, I think, what has helped me too, being at like an upper intermediate level and being able to basically communicate with almost everyone, like take a doctor appointment, take Stella to the vet, talk to the person who's fixing my lave-linge, the washing machine, all these kind of basic things that you don't think about. Going to an Apple Genius Bar appointment. All of these things are easier because I can interface with someone.
And you feel cool about yourself too. Yeah. Like if you can end up living your life in a different language, I've always thought that the word trash can is the best example because in American English it's trash can. Yeah. It's like trash and can. Trash. And in French it's poubelle.
Poubelle.
Combien c'est belle la poubelle. Like, ironic story, Poubelle is actually the last name of a former prefecture police of Paris.
Stop.
Is the guy who invented trash cans in the public sphere.
Stop.
He was like Monsieur le Préfet Poubelle.
Oh my God.
And there's descendants now of Poubelle, and they have to live with the fact. So we're talking about people, Monsieur Fromage. People have to change their name.
Oh my God.
Your last name literally means trash can because your ancestor.
But it sounds so pretty.
Yeah, but it sounds pretty. And for us as Americans living in France, every conversation is a language challenge, like, decoding on the back of a cereal box. Like,
totally. I'm
going to walk into a bank and I'm going to try to ask for a loan, and I'm going to do it in French. That's pretty hardcore.
That's an advanced Duolingo level.
Yeah. And you walk out of there, you're saying, well, like, I feel like my brain is firing on all four, all
it does
cylinders.
Something to your brain.
There's a synaptic thing. Yeah. It's creating new synapses. Your brain's thinking in new ways. And then like just how the French say words that you didn't necessarily think were as important as the French would say, like rendezvous and dossier and convocation. And you're like, yeah, I guess I am being convoked. Like con means with and Latin. And you're like, just like questing for voc means, vocale means to part. So let's come and talk together.
Yeah.
Like, you're like, oh, I didn't think I ever thought about it in this way.
Right.
Or like companion means like, share bread with, conjoin is to be joined with somebody. You start to just see world in a new way that you didn't see it before. And then your nationality is no longer just American. Your nationality becomes, I'm an American that lives in France. Yeah. And you start stopping to be able to connect with pure Americans.
Right.
That how they view guns, how they view healthcare, how they view taxes, how they view, school lunches, like any given subject, you're like, you can no longer quite see things the way you could see before because you let yourself be impacted in a new way.
You're forever changed. It's, again, making me so emotional. And I'm thinking about how I have started to feel more French, right? Like, this is my hometown now that I live here. When we were watching the opening ceremony for the Olympics, I was with one of our American friends in a bar full of French people, and we're watching Celine Dion sing, and I'm like weeping, being like, I'm so proud that this is my city, and I love this culture so much.
It's so bouncing off Celine Dion, but then pivoting to a different point that I wanted to make that's very connected. Celine Dion, of course, is Canadian, and that the reason she got famous was she represented Switzerland in 1988 in Eurovision, and that was her big breakthrough.
Switzerland.
and
did not know that
Eurovision, which is a
part.
thing that was missing in my life before I finally came here to Europe.
Eurovision.
And it's like very critical in my life now. I feel like
It's very
a
important.
big joy in my life. So the fact that she's then singing at the French opening ceremony, you know, her native tongue is French,
Right.
but Quebecois French, but that's okay.
So,
and so, you know, her role is, you know, when we study to become French, they give us a livret du citoyen, which we have to study in preparation for the naturalization interview. There's a big section about, you know, other foreigners that made it in France that have contributed to France and France's value. That includes Josephine Baker, who is an American performer who got added to the French pantheon. It includes, you know, Mary Curie, who every college, you know, middle school in France is named for. She was Polish.
Yeah. And her husband, I can't remember.
Her husband, Pierre, he was French.
Thank you.
He's less important to this conversation. But that...
It's Marie's turn, excuse me.
It's Marie's moment. Hashtag Marie's moment. That when I finally did become French last year,
congratulations.
That nationality that I'd given myself of not being an American, but being an American in French, got replaced with being a Franco-American.
Yeah.
And that, you know, we just started this at the very start of this thing, saying that I'm going to have a kid in 10 days. That kid's going to be born German and French and American. And like the ownership, the appartenance, the belonging of, you know, where they belong in the sky. Look at you.
I just literally cried. Sorry.
You know, I will always be as an immigrant, that first generation immigrant. I'll never truly belong in France as a Frenchie will, you know. And when Amanda and I did, you know, what does it mean to become French? She said, and you know, I never will become, you know, French. That kid who will be born French, and that child will belong to France, and also have other belongings too that we're giving to the kid. And so, and that's what's beautiful of it. And that's why, you know, as an immigration lawyer, I don't try to be too openly political in my beliefs, but I will always advocate for immigrants and for immigration. And this notion that you can come from someplace, you can end another place, and that you have value to add to this host community, that you're not to be condemned, but you're to be valued for the humanity that you bring.
You get
And if you vote for me as president,
yes, Daniel for president,
and or président, depending on which country I run,
start with mayor. I think we talked about this. I need you to be the mayor of where you live.
The mayor of my little small town. The politics don't match my politics, but you know, I would love to get on.
Just turn around.
I would love to get on the city hall, the conseil municipal of my small town.
Love it so much. Well, before getting back into logistics, I want to stay in this like very emotional and powerful moment.
Yeah.
Why France?
I'll never have a good answer for it, but I've always romanticized it. And it might be a combination of, you know, a certain series of films that we, you know, kind of grew up with, you know. It might have to do with this notion that we made. I think for me, the film above all films was a film called Sabrina in the 1990s, had Harrison Ford in it.
And, oh no, I'm thinking of the Audrey Hepburn one.
There is the 50s one, which is totally gorgeous, lovable.
Okay, so you saw the Harrison Ford edition.
I've seen both multiple times, but
love it.
The modern version has this montage in the first 5 minutes where she comes over here to France to become like an assistant. You know, she's kind of like the ugly Betty, like the ugly duckling kind of thing. But she comes over here to France to become the assistant photographer for modeling. And she, in that setting, you know, starts to fall in love with France. And they have that song La Vie en Rose that's playing in the background. Of course, it's a cliche, and
gets you every time though.
I mentioned that it's a cliche in the film, but that, you know, that's this kind of redefinition or reinvention of herself that she has in France. We sell that really hard in America, which I feel like I don't really have to work that hard to say, you know, come to move to France. To tell you about how cool France is. People know.
They know.
You know, they saw the Olympics now. They saw the opening ceremony. They saw Lady Gaga imitating 1920s France. They saw that woman of African origin singing La Marseillaise. That was so... I don't know her name.
Hold on. I know this because I talked about her dress. I'll come back to it.
Yeah. So powerful, her rendition of La Marseillaise.
Yep. And then Maya Akamura.
Yes, with the Jaja, you know, the blending of like French African style rap with like the French National Guard style drum kit, drum, you know, guard, like all these various nuances of what does it mean to be French were on display. So I don't have to sell France one bit. You know, France sells itself, and if I can help people being that conduit to help share France with them, then that's a vocation. Like that's what I'm on some level called to do, and which is why. Why this is such a burgeoning market, and it's a great niche to be in.
Why it's so special to you too.
Yeah, because I lived it. And I think that's why I connect with folks. Is because I was on, what was I on? I was on a travailleur temporaire visa. Then I was on student visa. Then I was on what was called APS. Then I was on entrepreneur. Then I was on Space View National. And then I got French nationality.
APS is not au pair something.
No, APS is now called RECE. But APS is what you get after you graduate.
Got it. I was like, you weren't an au pair, but AP just jumped in my head.
I actually, no, I wasn't. I did au pairing in Iceland, but that's a different podcast.
Okay, different story for a different day.
Different channel.
Just like on this whole, like the romanticization, but it's real. I don't feel like my experience here is divergent from the dream I had in my head. Like it feels just as joyful and lovely with all of its like ugly bits, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, what I will say is that it's changed. So there was the France that if you meet people from the 90s that moved here or, early or pre-smartphone, pre-laptops,
sure,
they had a more authentic experience, I would say, of France than we could ever have moving to France today. Because today we've got smartphones, we've got Twitter, we've got WhatsApp, and you never truly lose contact with your home country and with reading Huffington Post online or whatever. Back in the day, it was like you read the French newspaper, you listened to French radio, you had French television.
Sure.
You could long distance phone call, but that was too expensive. So you wrote letters to your home country.
Yeah.
So like you were like deep, like off the deep and into France.
Totally.
And I think I got just a smidge of that, a little tasty taste of that.
I'm actively trying to be analog like that as well.
Good. In 2010, I moved here before I had a smartphone, and like internet was cybercafe was at the best.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And so like I would have it was Skype back then. I would have Skype calls with my family from a McDonald's would have Wi-Fi.
Oh my gosh.
But I wouldn't pay for anything at McDonald's. And this one McDonald's staffer came by. She's like, "Monsieur, c'est pas un cybercafé." It's not a cybercafe.
Yeah.
And so I looked around. I saw this one dude had like McDonald's trash in front of him. So I asked him, "Vous avez terminé?" Like,
yeah.
And so I took his trash and I put it in front of me.
Yeah.
And I kept my call going. And then the guy
I'm a client. I'm a customer.
And then the guy kind of like walked up to me like 5 minutes later to be like stared down at me. But I kept my eyes on the computer screen. I was like, I'm not lifting my eyes right now. And then like 20 minutes later, I walked out of the McDonald's and I saw him sit down on the sidewalk. He was actually a homeless dude. So I had unwittingly taken the McDonald's trash from a homeless dude to pretend to belong in McDonald's.
Oh my God.
For a Wi-Fi call.
So you could Skype.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. TBT to Skype. What a time.
Yeah.
Do. Oh my gosh. That's like pre-Zoom, pre-COVID, all of that. But what you were saying about like really immersing yourself, it is something that I try to do because I notice, with my language learning, I backslide a little bit if I consume too much English media.
Yeah.
Anglophone is what I mean to say, like American media, obviously. Yeah. So I actively try. I have, my phone and all my like devices are set to French. I listen to French music. I try to be listening to French podcasts. If I'm watching an American show, I have my French subtitles on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, merci.
Merci. So I am actively trying to have that, like, I guess, 90s analog experience of being here and trying to pay more attention to French news than the American news makes me sick any day. So
yeah, the point in time when I really decided to make that flip was because I moved here in 2010 for the first time for a couple months. Then 2011, 2012, I was on the French island of La Réunion. I was teaching English.
Totally.
There's a program for your listeners who are in their 20s called TAPIF, TAPF, Teaching Assistant Program in France. If you've got like a halfway decent level of French and you're a native English speaker, you can come over here and teach English for a school year in a lycée or a collège. Great program to get a first taste of France, similar to the au pairing. That's another way of getting your experience.
So cool.
And it was 2015. I was living in Morocco, doing asylum law in Casablanca, and kind of living in French there. And I said, okay, I'm ready. I'm going to move to France next year. I'm going to flip everything into French. So everything I was reading became French. Everything I was consuming on Netflix was French. If it was English, I wasn't watching it.
Totally.
Putting in movies, it would be French with French subtitles because movies are kind of hard. You have phases of French music rap, like what kind of music do I want to get into? French classic, la chanson française.
Yeah. I listen to Starmania a lot.
Okay, there you go.
Loved it.
And figuring out what kind of parts of French culture you appreciate the most. For me, it was L'Auberge Espagnole, with the French film with a French actor called Romain Duris. When I had my naturalization interview, the guy he saw that I was an immigration lawyer and he was trying to like test me. He was like, okay, I'm not going to ask you the classical questions.
Dang.
Tell me a French actor you like. And I was like, okay, that's not on the official list.
Yeah. Let me just pull it out real quick.
I pulled out Romain Duris.
And he was like, oh, damn.
Just throw everything into French. In terms of news, there's Huffington Post in English, but then there's Huffington Post in French too. Right. Le Monde is probably the best French news source. and you could follow that. French politics typically is pretty boring. This summer, 2024, has been spicy meatball. It's been really, really hot and contentious.
Spicy meatball for sure.
And so there's just plenty of ways for you to figure out, like, because I'm a very political person, so I like the French, politics podcast. There's one that's called C'est dans l'air, and it's on Spotify. And so it's an hour long. You can hear French intellectuals talking about French politics. So you can kind of figure out what your vitesse is, what kind of French stuff you want.
Pick your flavor, pick your vibe. Yeah.
And then plug full force into that. Do Rosetta Stone on levels 1 through 5 in French.
Sure.
There's a website called iTalk. You can get one-on-one classes. There's Alliance Française.
So many options.
So franchement, if you want French in your life, there's no excuse.
Right.
Put it in your life. There's really good TikTokers that teach French, Instagram people. We're hooked up with them.
So many of them.
And yeah, so there's no excuse. If you want to get good at French, get good at French. Because as you were just saying, Dominique, it really helps you with your French life.
It does. And your capacity to connect with people. And I think that's one of the most special things about moving to a new place is the ability to connect with people. And it's so much easier to facilitate connection if you're on the same page, speaking the same language. And I think people really appreciate if you're making the effort to speak their language the same way that you would be if someone came to the US and was learning English.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the other side of things too, is that in America, we only truly have like American music and American film and American media, and America's so big that from San Diego, you could go to the Grand Canyon, Las Vegas, San Francisco, Hawaii. You don't really need a passport to have 10 years
very diverse experience in terms of environment.
Yeah. Versus here in France, they've got their philosophers, their magazines, they've got, they also kind of feel like they could be in their own little bubble. And so the French don't want you showing up and saying, hey buddy, where's that Eiffel Tower? Yeah. They kind of want you to speak in French to them. So they've got that same mentality that if you were walking down like LA streets and someone only spoke to you in French, you might be like,
you'd be so jarred.
You'd be like aggressive, like, hey, like this is America. Like
speak English.
That it can throw you off kilt.
Totally. And that's what I tell to people when they come here and they don't start with the bonjour and they don't even learn like vous parlez anglais, right?
Yeah,
like a basic, like, or like,
je
peux parler anglais. Like, just, can I speak English? Do you speak English? And you just immediately walk in and just start talking American at them.
Yeah.
That has got to feel so aggressive to a native French person.
Yeah. I tell you what, I was invited once to speak to a class of students from, that were like studying abroad from West Virginia, and they were here, and I started speaking to the entire room of them. I was like, what do you know are in terms of your guys and your goals? Like, how many of you would want to move to France? And nobody raised their hands.
Oh my gosh.
And it turns out they weren't doing a study abroad for a semester. They were doing a study abroad for like 6 weeks to kind of get like a taste of Europe and a taste of, but they were like purely, this is just a little, a vacation about my life is in America. And I had so little to say to them because like my knowledge and expertise is if you have a dream of France, like I never have to sell France. And so in that situation, I was having to really
sell it. And you're like, wait,
like, did you know that? And I was like pulling out the world's best thing. I was like, they've got 5 weeks of vacation. But don't stop there. If you are what they call cadre, which is like a manager, you can get like 42. One of my friends has 49 days of holidays here in France.
Holy shit.
That holiday is paid. Healthcare is a human right. That, like doing my best job to pitch France. France does have its good qualities. Of course, it has its negative qualities, and that probably merits its own episode in and of itself. But that on the whole, we decided that it's worth it.
Yeah, it's the dream that was worth it every step of the way, in my opinion. Yeah. For those who are falling in love and they want to stay long term, I think we kind of talked about this, the process of transitioning from a visa of any type to long-term residency. That was that 10-year card that you brought up, right? It takes about 5 years to get to that point.
Yeah, but there's other multi-year cards that you can qualify for in the meantime. Okay. So like, let's say somebody is, so visitor goes 1 year, 1 year, 1 year, 1 year, 1 year. But entrepreneur goes 1 year, 4 years. Same thing goes for the employee one. If you're the spouse of a French national, it goes 1 year, 2 years, 10 years. If you were what I ended up on, which is spouse of an EU national, that's a 5-year card. So there's a couple different stops of the bus before you can get to a 10-year card.
Before you get to that.
Depending on your situation.
The finish line of the 10-year card.
Yeah.
And that 10-year card can hold you over while you are seeking naturalization, correct?
Yeah. Okay. I call it like two parallel railroad tracks. There's the immigration track and the naturalization.
Okay.
And you have to maintain your immigration track until you can finally naturalize. And then you're on the naturalization track. You can forget about titre séjour and
yeah, because I'm like, I just renewed my France annual pass. Like it's my Disneyland annual pass to my romantic life in France. But in terms of people, winding it back a tiny bit just based on a listener question, getting that first visa, there are a couple things that you have to show document-wise, right? And we were talking about that, like if you have a business idea and you want to show like your business plan and the connections that you have, the letters. Let's say you're doing the long stay visitor. One of the audience members our listeners rather, has asked, how much money do I need to have in my account to show them that I have enough to move here?
The answer is 17,000 euros, but more so than having a sitting balance, they care about cash flow. They want to see money entering the account. And the framing that I think is behind this is because maybe you have 400,000 sitting in your account, but that you get here and then you buy a property and put in a deposit of 400,000, and then you have no money to pay for the next month.
Right.
Anybody that lives here in France can qualify for French public benefits. But you on this visitor status are saying, I'm not going to be a burden on society. I've got my health coverage. I've got my financial stability. I've got housing. I'm not looking for a handout. I'm not looking for a French job. I'm just going to be here, minding my own business kind of thing. And the challenge is then if you had savings, but then you spent it all, then you might actually qualify for benefits because you don't have any money. So they want to see cash flow entering your account, 17,000 euros. And it's going to have some amount of sitting balance, you know, at least several thousand euros. There's not a hard and fast rule about that, but they are clear. They need to see at least French minimum wage net.
Right.
To get that
Mine was in
status.
dollars, but I think it was fine just because they saw, like I highlighted on my documents, like income for each month. Yeah.
And when you're talking about like filing at the consulate, these are French consulate agents living in America. So they can speak English. They know what a dollar or 2 euros is.
Totally.
Unlike that when you're here in France and you're dealing with a local prefecture.
Not going to fly.
They're franco-français. Jean-Pierre doesn't know the dollar exchange rate.
He doesn't want to know about it.
And it throws him off his kilt to see, here's an English looking bank statement in a foreign currency.
Right.
And his ears prick. You know,
he's like, absolutely not.
He wants to.
C'est pas possible.
C'est pas possible, and he wants it in the French way.
Okay. And then, can those people who get the long stay visitor keep renewing until the point of naturalization?
So the trick of it is that when you're on that long stay visitor visa, you're promising to not have a French job, a French employer, or a French client. And to get naturalization, they wanted to see insertion on the French labor market, 18 months.
Okay.
Plus, they also want to see stable tax returns. But I don't think you can go directly from visitor onto naturalization. What you need to do is have an intermediary step where you go visit onto the 10-year card, which lets you work here in France. And then you have a seismic shift where the center of your economic interests are, in fact, from France.
Right, okay.
So you have a job and it's here.
Sure.
And that you have at least more than half of your money coming from France. But ideally, just you have a certain period of time where you've got no money coming from elsewhere, that your balls are in the court of France. So that if they're saying, well, look, we're going to add you to the club of Frenchness, we want to make sure that you're not going to like dip out and move to Israel or Dubai or Tokyo afterwards.
Sure.
That you've got some random pull factor, like a spouse in Mexico, a job in America, or a child in India. They want you to have all your eggs in the French basket, the center of your economic and familial interests in France.
Cool.
In order to give it to you.
So let's say that person's unemployed, but they have like a spouse or a PAX partner.
Oh, you're asking a really interesting question.
I'm just throwing stuff out.
You're like spitballing like test questions for the final.
Quizzing you for your
French immigration
your
law.
podcast exam.
Podcast exam. It's going to be French grading with like the system of 20 or American grading. So when people are unemployed, I generally do not encourage them to file for naturalization until they are gainfully employed.
Wow, okay.
But if they are married, then they are, in French, where they call that a household, a foyer fiscal. And so they're looking at the household income.
Oh, got it. Okay.
So we were able to get naturalized a Japanese stay-at-home mother who was not working because her American spouse had more than enough financial stability.
Cool.
So it can, there's ways to make that work. So
there are options. I'm just thinking like, not everyone goes to college. Not everyone has a job. Good for them. But like just thinking about other avenues.
Yeah, no, but it's generally advisable to to have a job and have a, one of our victories, because we are a law firm, but we're not, a lot of it just to help people move here to France. So we do it from time to time, file appeals. And this one was a messy one where a woman was a retiree on the 10-year card, not working anywhere. And she filed for naturalization and they rejected it. They said, Madame, how can you think you've got the center of your economic interest in France? You don't work here and your pension is not from here. So as far as we're concerned, you don't have the basis of your finances from France. So we're not going to naturalize you. And we found French case law said that's n'importe quoi. That's not how this works.
Oh.
And so we rubbed the noses of the Ministry of the Interior in their own opinion that just because you're retired doesn't mean you can't qualify for naturalization.
Oh, heck yeah.
And last week they overturned the appeal And so now I can go on record as saying retirees can, in fact, file for naturalization.
Amazing. That's so cool to hear.
Yeah. So we're making case law on a certain level. And so now that knowledge is out there and we can promote that there are ways to work, to be naturalized in France, not necessarily working. You might not be the world's best candidate for naturalizing if you're 70 and now all of a sudden you want to become French.
Right. But c'est vraiment possible.
Yeah, il y a des moyens.
Okay,
il y a des solutions. There's ways to make it work.
Another, I guess, work and visa situation. A listener has asked, is it true that if I am an auto entrepreneur, I cannot get a French passport?
No, I was an entrepreneur when I filed for naturalization. I got it.
Amazing. Easy answer.
The answer is yes.
Excellent. Those were all of our questions from the community. Is there anything else that you want to leave listeners with? My best takeaway usually is if you want to live in France, learn French. But we already really hit that, nailed that one home. I'm so glad we did.
Yeah. The other one being in theory that if you want to move to France, that there's always a solution for you. There's ways to make that work as well. For us as Americans, we tend to associate that Paris is France and France is Paris.
Sure. Yeah.
Versus my British clients that tend to spread out, to the south of France.
Yeah. I love the south.
So that, there is more to France than just Paris. And it is really worth the exploration to it. Because now that we live here, we can have the richest in France at our fingertips. Because Paris is, in my opinion, the best train hub in the world.
Oh, totally.
You can go in so many different directions, 10 different countries, Belgium, Luxembourg, Italy, Portugal, Germany, wherever you want to go, it's all right there, Switzerland. And even within France, there's the TGV, the fast speed train that can connect us with Normandy, Bretagne, Provence, whatever you'd like, it's right there. Paris, Bordeaux is an hour and a half in fast speed, train.
So cool.
And then that's a short trade ride into French Basque country. So France has a real richness to it that I don't think a lot of other EU countries have. It has the mountains, it has the desert, it has there's no desert. Let's start over again.
But besides the desert part, it's kind of the California of Europe.
Oh yeah. There's Sierra Nevada stuff of it. There's the coastline to it.
Yeah. And all the beaches in the south remind me of San Diego. Yeah.
And they say that the town of Biarritz, which is worth exploring, is the French California.
Right, for the surfing.
There is surfing. Yeah, that's doable there.
There have been surf podcasts for years.
I think of Nice as the Florida.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
This could be its own little clip here. Nice is the Florida.
Okay.
Grenoble is the Colorado of France. Golly, I'd have to think about what the New Jersey of France is. It might be Dunkirk.
I was like, the Garden State. I'm thinking where do they grow stuff? Champagne.
Okay, because New Jersey is known as the Garden State.
Yeah.
But they've got a lot of farming in New Jersey?
That's where a lot of the produce comes from, apparently.
I learned something new. Here we go. I'm always happy to say I'm an expert in immigration, but there's other things I'm not an expert in. I'm happy to be.
New Jersey's exports.
You are listening to the New Jersey Export Podcast, where every week we diagnose.
The logo is just our heads coming out of necks. In New Jersey.
That's fantastic.
Incredible. But yeah, the richness to France, the diversity and environment, and the cultural nuances, even just going to, I was at Mont Saint-Michel this time last year, and it's such a different vibe from Paris, the Normandy. It's just so cool. Yeah.
Or that I spent, a year on the French overseas territory, La Réunion, which is a tropical island. So France has, that's the Guam of France. And that they had a Creole culture that's not quite French. They had a Réunionnais culture that is in and of itself on its own thing. So there's just so much richness and diversity here that it truly is worthwhile. You can make a life of it here in France and never run out of things to do or see.
No, it's so good. And I feel like it's just so special that we get this gift of being able to live here. And you give that gift to so many people, including me. Thank you for everything that you do for all of us. I'm not going to cry again on this podcast. I don't know why I'm so emotional today. We're recording on the eclipse and it's emotional. No, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing the gift of your time and your intellectual powers with all of us.
That's a lot of fun today.
Yeah. Okay, let's do this again sometime after you settle into dadhood.
Yeah, we'll see how that one goes.
We'll see. TBT. Thank you, Daniel.
Cheers.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. I hope today helped inspire the next chapter of your life and maybe gave you some practical resources and action items so you can take your next steps. We'll be back here next week. You can subscribe on Spotify or Apple to get notified each time we release a new episode, subscribe to our Patreon to support our show, and sign up for our newsletter, Dominique en Rose, on Substack. All the links you need are in the episode description. We'll see you here next week, my loves. Gros bisous. À bientôt. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of This Is Fine. I've been your host, Dominique Michelle Astorino. We're based in San Diego, recording in studio at DLI Productions in Pacific Beach with Emmy Award-winning sound designer Dan De La Isla. This is a comedy and advice podcast, but for legal reasons, this entire podcast is a joke and none of it is medical advice. To download the transcript or learn more, visit thisisfinepodcast.com.